Okay, everybody, we have reached the bottom of the hour, so let's get started with today's L10 webinar, Key Skills Needed to Align with 2022 Trends, sponsored by Richardson Sales Performance Healthcare. My name is Tim Sosby. I'm editorial director for L10. It's my pleasure to welcome you today and to serve as a host of our program. I'm going to start with some quick housekeeping items for you. We are planning a 30-minute session for today's webinar. Your phones are on mute, so any questions, any comments you have, please do type into the control panel, into the questions box on that control panel there on the right side of your screen. Just type in the question, type in the comment while it's fresh in your mind, and we will get to it throughout today's webinar or save it for Q&A. But again, I always do urge you, send in your comments, your thoughts while they're fresh in your mind. Also on the control panel, I wanted to point out the handouts window. There is an item in there you may wish to download. It's the L10 2022 Certificate Program Brochure. Tell you more about our certificate programs planned for this year. You can highlight the title. It'll download to your desktop, walk you through downloading to your desktop. And if you have any issues with that, you can always reach out to me, and I can get you that handout offline as well. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand in the L10 Self-Directed Learning Library. I'm going to share an email with you or an address for you for that Self-Directed Learning Library later in today's program, and we're going to send you an email about 1 hour after today's webinar ends with a direct link to today's recording. And speaking of sharing, as you leave today's program, a follow-up survey will appear on a separate browser window. Please do take a moment when you leave today, look for that survey, and quickly share your thoughts with us. And finally, along those lines, there's my email address. If I can help with anything, please don't hesitate to reach out. All right, with all of that said, let me introduce you to our speaker today, Brad Ainsley. Brad is Vice President of Richardson Sales Performance Healthcare, and he's a dynamic sales and marketing executive with 30 years of business experience. Specializing in the life sciences field, Brad's key areas of expertise include strategic brand management, sales management, new business development, tactical planning, training, and facilitation. I know you're going to enjoy learning from Brad today, so I'm going to turn things over to him at this point. I'm going to ask you to bear with me. We're going to change to Brad's screen, and he's going to take it away from there from his screen. You're going to see your screen change as we pass things over to Brad. And Brad, thanks for joining us today.
Tim, thanks so much. I appreciate it, and thanks for all of you for being here this afternoon. And Tim, I want to make sure, are you seeing the correct screen here? It should have a purple slide that says Key Skills to Align with 2022 Trends.
I am, and I'm seeing your picture there as well. You're good to go. Thanks for joining us.
Well, glad you're here, folks, and we'll spend the next 20-25 minutes talking about this topic. And I think it is key in today's world that we talk about the trends and how to align with them, because things are changing so fast. Before we start, I'll do a quick introduction for those of you who may not know Richardson Sales Performance. Here's an idea of who we are and what we do. We're a proud longtime gold partner of L10, and back from the days of SPBT even. So we've been in business for over 40 years and are recognized as leaders in the sales training and performance improvement space by both Gartner and Forrester. But most important thing to know about us is that we love sales. It's what we do every day, all day. And we have a dedicated healthcare practice. That's all we do is focus on healthcare for the healthcare practice. And we combine our experience in sales across multiple verticals with our healthcare expertise to really focus on the skills and behaviors that your team needs to get better and to be more agile in today's market and adapt to the ever-changing selling environment. All right, so with that being said, let's just jump right in here, and to really set the stage, first thing we have to do is talk about what are the trends for today, right? What are some of the key trends? And the first thing we'll focus on is consolidation, convergence, and cost containment. And everybody, some of this is not new or groundbreaking, but COVID-19 really created budgetary strains and financial uncertainty, and it's really creating a renewed focus on additional methods to control cost in healthcare. For example, let's look at hospitals. When you consider that the average hospital margin pre-COVID was about 1.6%, and then you add the slow return to normal for procedures and the additional spending on the pandemic, you can see that they are struggling with profitability. And this has led to that greater focus on cost control methods. It's also led to consolidation with the larger health systems beginning to acquire smaller hospitals and smaller systems. And that's just in the hospital market. I mean, the same can be seen across other healthcare organizations as well. So one interesting note regarding cost containment and the skills, we'll jump right into the skills piece, the skills that representatives themselves are looking for. When we conduct our level 1 evaluations after we have a training course, we've asked over 3,000 healthcare participants what additional training they need to be successful. And what's really interesting is this year, with all these cost control measures, the #1 answer was actually negotiation skills. And that was followed by presentation skills and consultative dialogue skills. So it's really interesting as we move forward and look at it from a representative perspective. Now, you can also have, you also have the convergence of technology and medicine to really disrupt the healthcare market by increasing the total amount of data that's available for decision-making process and how people want to get engaged, how they want to be talked to. And it's really forcing changes in how we interact with our HCPs. But we have to keep in mind also that increased data does not always translate to easier decision making. In fact, many times it leads to confusion in the buying process. And that leads us to the next 2 trends that we see. All right. It really created that first trend really has created a cascade that leads to the increase in the complexity of the buying process, as well as the need for consensus among the stakeholders and decision makers. And then we're going to talk about the implications of these 3 trends for a second, and then I'm going to come back to the last trend here, new provider preferences due to the digital transformation. Okay, we're going to come back to that one. All right. So let's talk about these 3 for a moment. When we talk about consolidation, convergence, and cost containment, that's the big one at the top, and that caused the cascade for the others, a lot of the other trends. This consolidation has really led to an increase in the complexity of the buying process, and here's why I say this. The number of stakeholders involved in the average B2B purchase is up 70% in the last 10 years. Over 80% of those involved are non-C-suite staff now, and they have a say in the purchase decisions in the process. If you take this specifically to healthcare, about the same time frame as the beginning of this, the data I just shared, Google studied how hospital administrators make purchase decisions. In 2013, they listed over 13 roles that are decision influencers or decision makers. So if you add the 70% increase over those 10 years, you're looking at an additional 9 or 10 influencers or decision makers that are now coming into the decision-making process. So you can imagine, and I know you've seen it, what today's value analysis committee looks like. Now, as a result, buying has become more consensus-driven as the need to decrease or spread the risk arises. So instead of the typical linear buying journey that's more typical of a pre-pandemic time that you see, you can see that illustrated, kind of the typical linear buying process. You can see that illustrated in the yellow boxes on the graphic, and this graphic comes from Gartner. But now, what you have with the increased number of stakeholders and the complexity of the buying process is consensus buying. And this is causing looping back, revisiting decisions, misalignment among those that are making decisions and influencing during the purchasing process. And this is what prompted pharmaceutical executive to say in an article they recently wrote titled "Commercial Models for the Changing Life Sciences Market." Their quote was, "As the market evolves, a nimble approach will be critical to serving the organization's growth goals, and that organizations need to convert traditional models to a more agile approach that's capable of handling and even thriving in a sea of disruption." So we're hearing a lot about agility in sales here, and we're going to cover on skills that really are based in agility. So representatives really have to be able to leverage all the constant changes that are now happening and that are caused by this nonlinear decision making, and they have to leverage those to deliver value at every step in the process. So with that being said, what skills do they need? Well, based on our agile methodology, we see there are 4 drivers that guide what sales representatives need to accomplish across all their interactions with the multiple stakeholders, and then also drive the skills that they need. So let's talk about these 4 drivers here. First, they have to be able to direct the vision. I mean, this is the skill and strategy of how to co-develop a future state vision by diagnosing critical business and practice issues and shaping the vision of the capabilities that are needed based on your differentiators, based on your solutions differentiators. It's an approach that integrates a strong questioning strategy with conversational flow techniques like prefacing, pursuing, pacing, phrasing. These are all skills that need to be integrated in to help direct the vision, the buying vision. Next, we have getting to power, because remember, you can't sell to somebody who can't buy. So here, representatives need to be able to understand the decision-making process and the structure to help them gain access and stay connected and aligned with those that are in influence and authority, that have influence and authority. Now, getting to power really involves understanding the decision process, influence and roles, as well as the competitive relationships that are going on in the organization. And you also have to ask for access to those senior decision makers, and that can be challenging sometimes. So these consultative conversations have to be well orchestrated and intentionally planned. So here are the skills of creating value statements that are relevant to the stakeholders and getting agreement to move up the chain are key. All right, so then let's look, oops, sorry, didn't mean to change the slide on you there. So let's look at now driving consensus and resolving risk. Risk is big nowadays in that every decision being made has a cost, and it seems to have higher impact now more than ever. So creating consensus requires aligning around that deep understanding of the business or clinical issue and what the cost of not addressing it are. What are the capabilities that are needed to address it and the value of doing so? When you look at some data from Indegene, what they say is that almost 2/3 of healthcare providers believe that the most significant area where pharma representatives can add value is by understanding the need of HCPs and sharing only relevant content. Now, one of the reasons they say that is because they have access to a vast array of information. And you would think that that would make it easier for decisions, but quite frankly, customers often misdiagnose their own needs with this plethora of data, or they're limited in their understanding of the best way to address their needs. And what they need and what they're looking for is a partner that can bring clarity to their thinking, really get to the root cause of an issue, guide them in the best way to address the issue, and then help develop the case for change. So here, representatives need to be able to co-develop with your HCP and your customers a collaboration plan. That collaboration plan outlines the steps that are agreed to with decision makers. How are we going to evaluate this solution? And it's focused on minimizing risk for the customer. At the end of a buying cycle, risk is one of the highest psychological barriers in the buying process. And this collaboration plan defines the actions that both parties are going to take to ensure the customer feels comfortable making a buying decision. Okay. Now, lastly, we have the last of the 4 drivers is persuade with value. Representatives have to position the value of their solution in a way that appeals to both the logic and the emotion of the customer and makes a compelling case for change. And here, the skills we're talking about are positioning, checking and developing and using concise value statements to clearly link the solution to the value that they're going to provide. All right, so those are the 4 drivers. And if those 4 drivers are the things that the representatives have to accomplish across the multiple conversations they have, then there are, and because these customer interactions are so important, so is how we execute them. And there are 6 critical skills that are what power excellence and agility in those customer conversations. And when you look at these skills, you may say, okay, these look pretty obvious. What we have found is that what separates a good seller from a great one is the degree to which they can master these skills and use them with flexibility to provide that exceptional customer experience in the moment. So we'll just quickly run down these. presence, how do you project confidence and credibility and conviction in your body language and your voice, and really use that to gain respect and inspire trust. Trust is key. Relating, using that acknowledgement, building rapport, using empathy to connect so that you, again, help build trust and foster openness. And that comes also in the questioning. How do we get our customers into a dialogue? We have to be able to uncover and explore and shape what they're looking for. And then to do that, we also have to listen to what they're saying. Not just the content of what they're saying, but how they're saying it, the emotion behind it. That helps demonstrate that we're interested and we're, again, building trust. Then from a positioning perspective, we have to be able to put the value and our compelling information in a relevant, logical progression so that it can be consumed and that it is persuasive. And then lastly, checking. Really getting feedback from your customer on, are we aligned? Are we in the same space right now? And what we have found is that of these, questioning is the skill with the most potential power. I mean, think about a conversation you had in a sales environment where someone who was authentically curious, they were asking great questions. It happened to me at Best Buy, and they dug deeper when you responded. The degree to which you might open up and share information with that person is probably a lot bigger than you would with someone who asks poorly worded questions or puts several questions in a row or makes assumptive answers with those questions. So it's probably, it's a very different experience. You're probably more likely to share more and build that sense of trust, and that is a competitive advantage. So if questioning is the one with the most potential power, the one we see most underutilized is checking. I know sales representatives, a lot of times they joke and say representatives have two modes, talking and waiting to talk. And sometimes we need to slow down and check in to make sure that we are really aligned with where our customer is. So the ability to solicit feedback during a conversation is a powerful way to ensure that the customer is following along with you. And if not, how do I redirect? How do I get back on track, right? Okay. So we quickly covered the key skills needed to address the first three trends that we talked about. And I mentioned that we'd come back to new provider preferences due to the digital transformation and the implications. And as this digital transformation continues, we're seeing new expectations and communication preferences from physicians. And depending on the source at which you look, anywhere between a half and 2/3 of physicians want virtual or hybrid engagements. Now here's where it gets a little tricky. While they say that, almost half of them, 43% of physicians, felt that in-person engagements built trust. They liked the connection. They had a point of contact and a relationship. They were more personalized in their communications. Whereas virtual engagements, they felt the communication was less effective and it was harder to build relationships. Then again, another 40% didn't like the longer time commitment of the face-to-face or physical engagement, or they didn't appreciate the physical risk or the inflexible nature of an in-person meeting. So therein lies the conflict and the reason that the hybrid approach is preferred and useful in today's marketplace. Now, several key challenges arise from these data. While many physicians embrace the hybrid or virtual model, the reach and frequency equation is off. If you look at what the work that ZS has done, you can get a reach of 93% when you look at a frequency of 1 contact per year. But as you look at additional frequency, the numbers fall dramatically, with a reach of just 25% when you're talking about a frequency of 4 contacts per year. Additionally, physicians, according to physicians don't believe that the quality or effectiveness of the call was equal to a face-to-face call. So we mentioned that earlier. All right, so we know also that if it's done right, according to Accenture, virtual engagements, when they're done right, physicians will reward them with additional time and attention, or be willing to talk to others from their organization. So when it's done right, it's important, and it makes a difference, and it's a differentiator. So it's imperative with fewer interactions and a skeptical audience, that reps make every interaction count, right? They've got to conduct effective virtual engagements with highly relevant and personalized information that provides value to the physician. All right. So lastly, let's mention this. With frequency decreasing, there's a big case to be made for effective digital communication skills. In fact, work that Viva has done found that emails sent from representatives were opened 10 times more than those sent by marketing. So this is a big part of, or can be a big part of your sales effort. Now, as a quick side note, and we talked about the physician perspective on virtual engagements. In our, when we looked from a representative perspective and conducted our annual Selling Challenges survey, we broke out the answers from over 800 healthcare representatives and managers and asked them, what are your selling challenges? And what's interesting is they're very similar to healthcare practitioner feedback. The #1 selling challenge was selling in a virtual environment. And when we asked them what are the top challenges, what their top challenges were for selling virtually, they said it was more difficult to connect, and people behave differently. They're not engaged. They come in and out. We're probably experiencing some of that here now that we've all been so Zoom indoctrinated. But it's really interesting that there's a similarity between the two different groups. So given these changing physician engagement preferences, it is clear that representatives need to be phygital. And I love the word. I wish I could say I coined it, but I didn't. They need to be phygital. They have to have capabilities to engage physically, virtually, and digitally. Again, more information from ZS. When they profiled representatives to look at potential skill gaps, when you're talking about this phygital capability, they found that 60% of representatives had gaps based for the need of engaging in all three of those environments. They also found that only half of pharma companies are really investing in or retraining or upskilling representatives, and that very few are working to get the representatives up to speed when it comes to providing that personalized content that physicians are expecting. All right. So with that being said, let's look at what skills are needed in a virtual environment, a virtual engagement. Let's talk about the virtual first. So, and by the way, I also want to acknowledge that most companies have provided basic level of virtual engagement training. But now organizations are realizing that virtual selling is going to be around for good, and they need to shore up their skills. All right. So there are really three key skill areas that representatives need to focus on: preparation, virtual selling skills, and meeting structure and facilitation skills. When we talk about preparation, you're really talking about face-to-face plus. So what you're talking about, you're planning for a face-to-face meeting plus. So you've got to be able to project that professionalism, as we said. You've got to be able to build rapport virtually. You have to use technology effectively and really plan for that. What's my background look like? Do I have a plan B if something goes wrong? How do you set expectations to really gain that connection about who's going to be on camera and how? And really, from a materials perspective, feedback we've received is that a lot of representatives will use material that's just repurposed from hard copy, and that it's really not conducive to the virtual environment. So virtual, again, from a virtual selling skills perspective, we're talking about those 6 critical skills that we discussed earlier. Being able to have that virtual presence, really having the ability to engage while holding everybody's attention. We talked about listening and how important that is. How do you, and then having the ability to pull people into the conversation, understanding that, hey, John, thank you so much. I appreciate that feedback, but we haven't heard from Linda here. I'd love to hear her perspective on this. So how do you bring everyone in? And then lastly, meeting structure and facilitation skills, right? We've got to be able to tighten that meeting structure, because how many times have you been on a virtual meeting and time gets away from you and you actually miss the opportunity to drive to the action of the close and the action needed? So we've really got to tighten up that meeting structure, making sure you recognize that there's an informal opening. sign in early, greet everyone, connect. This is kind of like walking down the hall with the physician on their way to their office. Then formal opening. How do I begin the meeting so that everybody knows, yes, we're starting now? What's the positive tone? How do I set that? Set the context. And then in the body, really adjusting the focus of the conversation to where the customer is in their buying journey, right? So these are all skills that one has to master in the virtual world, all right? When we look at, let's shift now to digital and discuss a little bit about the digital realm here. And I'm talking primarily email and let's call it digital contacts. I know I've touched on it previously, but when it comes to digital selling, almost 3/4 of physicians in the US said it was important to receive personalized, relevant information. Over 70% say it's an expectation that they have of representatives to personalize the information they get in a digital environment based on their prior interactions. So when we talk about digital skills, here's some keys, right? Digital engagement is just that. It's about engagement. The goal is to get to a live interaction. We're from an agile perspective, we want to prioritize that live interaction. So everything we do is trying to get to that live interaction. And so the path we see most often successful with digital engagement is connection, engaging digitally and then setting the stage for that live appointment. So how do I connect digitally? From a response to an email, from a LinkedIn post, like whatever the case may be, and then how do I leverage that to gain that connection, to get a phone call that says, okay, now let me get this appointment here, let me gain this appointment. So they've got to be able to align relevant messages to their target and have the capability to develop a multi-touch cadence. What are the calls that I'm going to make? How do they fit in with the emails I'm going to send? How do the messages fit in? And any other contexts that are allowed by individual organizations. I mean, some may be more able to participate in LinkedIn chats. Others may not. And we certainly understand that. But every statement, every message or insight that's shared should really express the value that they add to the relationship. And here's why. Neuroscience tells us that information that stands out or seems relevant is more likely to affect our thinking and our actions. It's called saliency bias. So really, it's important to really have that, do your homework, have your messages lined out in a cadence, right? And then be prepared for the connections when you make them. You have to have that call planned out to make sure that you can get to that longer appointment, that in-person appointment, all right? And then when you do, how do you gain that appointment? It's, again, not rocket science here, but when you get on the phone, it's connecting, building that rapport, using a hinge or some connection, whether it's a mutual friend or a mutual acquaintance, even an organization that you both belong to. What is the hinge that you're going to use to connect? How are you going to gain the interest and demonstrate value that you're going to provide up front? What questions will you ask? And then asking for action. How do I get the appointment? By positioning the benefit of what we're going to discuss to the customer. Make sure you suggest times, dates, and then sometimes you're going to have to make that second effort. And then gain the commitment and collaborate on the agenda. Make sure you're aligned with the agenda, right? And I know we're coming down to time. The last thing I'll say here is the other thing we have to be aware of is what are the do's and don'ts of digital communication? Understanding what the best subject lines are for opens. What are the best bodies and the best signature? Which always surprised me that best becomes one of the best signatures compared to thanks or regards. I would not have guessed that. So, shorter subject lines are better than longer subject lines. These are the types of things that we have to intersperse into our digital knowledge, if you will. So I just want to say at that, I'm going to leave it there because we're coming up at the top of the hour. A lot of the concepts that we discussed today come from our Agile suite of offerings called Sprint Selling. And if you're interested, just reach out and we'll be glad to discuss. And I want to thank all of you for joining us today. And I know we've got just 1 minute before everybody pops off. So if we can take one question, I'll be glad to.
Well, thanks, Brad. I appreciate that. Great presentation. Folks, if you're typing a question in for Brad, keep typing. We'll take the questions offline if we need to, but let me throw this question out, Brad.
Yeah.
We hear a lot of information about agility. Do you have any idea what percentage of your clients are really leaning into agility?
That's a really great question. I mean, what we're finding is that, especially in pharma, you know, that old adage, the aircraft carrier takes a long time to turn. What we're seeing is that probably about 50 to 60% of our clients are now becoming engaged in not just agility. I would say a higher percentage are involved in bringing agile skills and agile principles into the whole organization. But when we talk about bringing agility into sales, it's a little lower percentage. And what's interesting about that is you can tie the use of agile principles to an increase in revenue versus those companies that don't. And that's the bottom line is, and if I remember the number right, it's about a 30% difference. So we know that it's important. We know that with all these changes and trends in healthcare, that it's here to stay, that the selling process or the buying process is more complex, and our linear sales models of the past aren't created to be able to pivot and provide value and leverage the changes to provide value in each call. And that's what is expected from us now in today's marketplace. So we'll leave it at that.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Brad. And I know we're getting some questions for you. I'm going to have to take offline. I know we're at the end of the hour, and I know people need to get on with their next appointments. But let me thank you for a great presentation. And folks, if you are typing questions, please do keep typing them in. We will get some answers for you offline.
Right.
Brad, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, guys. We appreciate it. Y'all have a good day.
Rudy, just as I'm going to switch back over to my computer, just as we're closing out here, again, let me thank you all for joining us today. Just as we're closing out, I wanted to share some, I'm going to page through some slides I should have paged through already. I apologize for that. We get a chance to look at Brad's excellent program again. Just as we close out today, I wanted to invite you all to check out the L10 e-learning lounge. We have 15 micro-learning programs available for you to check out in the e-learning lounge on various different topics, and I would urge you to visit the L10 website to visit that, to look at the L10 e-learning lounge. This is our current events calendar. This changes quite a bit, so always keep an eye on the L10 events calendar on the L10 website. You can see what's coming up, our annual conference dates, June 13th to 16th in San Antonio. Later this month, our Learning Executive Invitation Only Forum. We have some networking mixers and some workshops and certificate programs coming up as well this year. And again, keep an eye on the calendar online because this changes quite a bit. And finally, I'm going to invite you to join us for our next webinars. We have 2 more webinars this week. We'll be back here tomorrow and Thursday. Tomorrow talking about upskilling for success, and Thursday, digital skills training. You're doing it wrong. And then we have a webinar next Friday, a week from Friday, March 11th, the first in a series of 4 well-being RX, talking about well-being and balance issues. This first program is kicking off about the medicine of connection. You can register for any of these programs and find more information here at this address. Here's the address for the Self-Directed Learning Library where today's recording will be housed. Again, I'm going to send you an email within an hour to connect you with that recording. And finally, there's my email address. If I can help with anything, please don't hesitate to reach out. So let me end with some final thank yous again. I'm going to thank everybody for joining us today. I'm going to thank our speaker, Brad Ainsley, our sponsor, Richardson Sales Performance Healthcare, and I'm going to thank all of you for your time, attention, and participation in today's webinar. We will see you tomorrow. We will see you on Thursday. Other than that, have a good rest of your day, a good rest of your week, and we will talk to you soon. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, everybody.